Hello and welcome to the Clean Bill of Wealth podcast for Canadian doctors. I am your host, Galen Nuttall. Join me as I interview doctors and related professionals and talk about what it takes to achieve wealth in this, the Great White North. Not just wealth as measured by a bank account, but also family, faith, and health. Be sure to go to GalenHelpsDocs.com. That is Galen, that is how my name is spelled, helpsdocs.com, to get access to my free video series where I uncover the top myths about growing your wealth as a doctor, north of the wall. Now, please enjoy the show. Welcome, Dr. Jordan Anderson, to the Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I'm the host, Galen Nuttall. And so just to talk a little bit about Jordan before we get going. So you're a second-year family medicine resident at Queen's University, and you're going to be completing your fellowship in sports and exercise medicine at McMaster University next year. And one of the big reasons that I was like, Jordan's got to be on my podcast is that Jordan has summited Mount Kilimanjaro, and in 2 years in a row, ranked the number one MD in Canada in the Crossfit Open, which is amazing on any accounts, but also being a doctor at the same time. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
And so Jordan and I are not, for anyone who's watching the video on my page, we're not actually sitting in the same room. Jordan's in Kingston and I'm in Belleville. But yeah, we're going to talk today. So Jordan, one of the things I always want to hear from doctors is, what is it that has motivated you, like sparked it in you to go through this rigorous process to becoming a doctor? What inspired you to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of it's a long story. Like anybody who kind of goes into medicine, there's always lots of kind of nuances to it. So I kind of got inspired late in high school. I was one of those kids that didn't know what he wanted to do, but worked hard in school and really liked sciences. And so one of my good friends decided that he wanted to go and try to be a doctor. And so I said, hey, yeah, I mean, why not, right? I mean, it sounds interesting. And as I went more and more through it, I realized that what really drew me to medicine initially, and even still to this day, is I like the sciences. Like I like that. I like learning about that every single day. But I wanted to be in something that was challenging and that I would have to work really hard at. And the more you work hard at something, the more you're going to get out of it. But something that was new and different every day. I worked a job in a lab for a couple summers in university, and it was a good job, but it was really, really monotonous. Like I knew exactly what my week was going to look like down to the minute, and I hated it. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to find something that was really challenging, really stimulating, but also that allowed me to have lots of contact with people and get to develop relationships with people in a very kind of intimate and personal way. And I think I've found a nice balance of all that. As I've gone along, my family doctor in Regina was really important for me growing up, and she was always someone that inspired me. And so I always wanted to make the impact in somebody else's life that she made in mine, and I think that's kind of what drew me to family medicine. And I mean, we all have good days and bad days, but I love it.
Very cool. And your family doctor, I mean, did she help you in the capacity? Like you're very much into sports. Like, was it in that capacity or a different capacity?
No, more just how she interacted. I mean, she was the family doctor for my whole family pretty well, and she was just so supportive and knowledgeable and knew kind of what was within her scope and what wasn't. And she was always there for us when we needed us, and we always felt like we could go to her with anything. And I thought that was just really cool that she gets to go into work every day and do that instead of doing something like plodding away in a lab. So I figured I had to chase something like that. Mm-hmm. In terms of the sports stuff, I mean, I grew up playing sports, never really all that well, but I really enjoyed it. And then I had realized, like, I had done the marathon triathlon stuff for a couple of years, and I got into CrossFit maybe 4 or 5 years ago already, and learned that I love that community, that community that works really hard and is passionate about the same things as I am. And so it's really easy to go to work every day when, I mean, your staff and your patients all are kind of passionate about the same thing. So it makes it pretty easy.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely cool. Like I'm hearing that you were looking for something that there was a bit of variety. Like you felt like there was easy to end up in something that would be boring, and you were in something where you knew what you were doing down to the minute and looking for some variety. And you had a doctor that inspired you, that had an impact on you. And I think that's pretty fascinating. Like I do hear that from doctors where they love the idea of variety and working with people. And that's really cool. And I didn't realize you did triathlons. What kinds of triathlons were you doing?
I trained for one Olympic
Okay.
triathlon. I did that, and then I continued my training from that into doing some half marathons and that kind of stuff, which
Cool.
I enjoyed. But I realized that I'm much more of a people person than someone who can go run by himself for an hour and a half, or that kind of stuff. And so
Yeah.
I need to go somewhere where there's people who I can interact with while I'm working out and doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. CrossFit's far more social than marathon.
oh yeah, to say the least. And then that's one of the things I've
Yeah.
enjoyed about it over the years.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I do Olympic distance triathlons every summer. I usually do 3 or 4, and it is pretty fascinating how lonely. I mean, like I'm alone, right? Like the whole time. There's people around, but it's not the most social sport in the world. I mean, it's people who
Yeah.
are willing to spend 3 hours alone doing something really rough on their body. So
No kidding.
it's funny. It's yeah, cool. So I mean, I guess, so one of the things that I can't help but wonder is, how are you managing to do all this? Like med school resident. So you were in med school when you climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, or
Yeah, so it was kind of right. It was one of the summers right in the middle of it. Yeah.
yeah. So I can't help but wonder, like, as I was reading your bio and everything, I'm like, man, like I have trouble finding time to go for like a 1 hour run, and I'm not, I'm not a resident, I'm not in med school, but so what keeps you going, and like how do you keep it up, I guess?
Yeah, it's a fair question. It's something surely I don't even really think about a whole lot. I just kind of go and do it. I think a lot of it is just over the years I've kind of learned how to prioritize what's important to me. So I've learned that if I go for long periods of time without exercising, I start to drive myself crazy. And I mean, obviously you have your responsibilities with work, and those aren't going anywhere. And then so you have your kind of work time and your non-work time. And I'm in a residency that's pretty. I mean, family medicine is not nearly as strenuous as a lot of other residencies, so I kind of use that to my advantage. But I find it's a lot of prioritization. Like I know the things that are important to me are exercise and socialization, hanging out with friends and family, and that kind of stuff as much as I can. So I put those kind of things first, and then I mean everything else kind of you just kind of squeeze in time for. Like I do a lot of meal prep on the weekends to be able to kind of carry myself through the week, and I don't watch a whole lot of Netflix, and I get a hard time from a lot of my friends for that because I'm very out of the loop with a lot of things. But really try to keep my focus on things that I'm really passionate about and things that I'm aware of what kind of keeps me going in life and what is just kind of a time killer. So I've tried to work hard at that over the years to try to separate those two things, and I feel like that's kind of carried me along the way. And it certainly wasn't always easy, especially starting out in med school, and that's a huge stressor, and you feel like you need to make work your life, and obviously you can't go for very long doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting to say, like, what you've noticed that getting that exercise in, if you go too long without it, you start to really see the effect of it. And I can definitely sense that. Like I'll go for a couple weeks without, like, so when I'm training, I'm going for like long runs on the weekend and runs during the week and a bike and a swim here and there, and I don't necessarily notice it so much while I'm doing it, but when I stop, the lack thereof starts to really seep in, and I'm like a little bit more irritable, a little bit more more tired, actually. Like I have less energy when I'm not working out, and and it starts to really creep in, and usually something will happen and I'll snap out of it and be like, when's the last time I went for a run? And it's easy, like, since it's so seasonal and we're in Canada, like, I mean, my next triathlon is, I don't know how many months away right now.
For sure, yeah.
So I guess it's creeping up by like 3-4 months. So I'm like, oh, I've got all this time. But then if I try to cram it all in the last month, it doesn't go too hot.
No, certainly not.
Perfect. And so right now you're in residency. So what would you say for someone who's listening or watching who is maybe earlier on in residency or in med school? Like, is there something that you think is there something that you've been able to do either on a daily basis or a general basis that's helped you stay grounded during this? Like, I mean, I follow a lot of different Instagram accounts around doctors, and there seems to be a lot of it's coming to the forefront, the work-life balance, mental health of medical practitioners. It's becoming much and more, I feel, to the top of mind. And what do you feel like you've been able to do to sort of stay grounded or well-rounded or kind of like keep going?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. You're exactly right. I think that's a bit. It's a lot more on the focus than it used to be, for sure. And don't get me wrong, I struggled a lot with that, especially early on in medical school. Like I was kind of alluding to, where I kind of shut out all my hobbies and activities and really just focused on school. And like I said, it didn't go very well. It didn't last very long, and I burned out very quickly and was wildly depressed and anxious and that kind of stuff. And I mean, once I kind of bounced back from that a little bit, um, I realized that, there's so much more to life than medicine. Like medicine will always be, it will always be there. Medicine is kind of, one of the beauties of medicine is that you'll never learn it all. No matter how many books you read or how much you study, there will always be more to know. And so, I mean, medical school will always have lots of checkpoints to make sure you're on track, but just to make sure that don't let medicine become your identity, I guess would be kind of the short form. Make sure, like, I wish I could have told myself in early medical school to keep those hobbies outside of work. And even though you feel like, oh, I should be studying more, or I'm not as smart, or I'm not working as hard as the people around me, to, like you said, to be well-rounded, you need to have other things in your life that you do other than one thing, whether it be CrossFit or medicine or all those kinds of things. So I think finding lots of things to do and finding out what you're passionate about are the two biggest things. Yesterday, I was having a conversation with a medical student. There was a couple of us, and they were asking, what should I do during my summers at medical school and that kind of thing. I did research for a couple summers, and again, I found that just kind of, it was good and it looks great on my CV, and that's cool. But I found that the year or two that I did a bunch of traveling and hung out with lots of friends in the summer, did so much more for me as a person and consequently as a physician than any amount of research did. So I would say keep your identity outside of medicine as strong as possible, for sure.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. Like you said, like there's always going to be more to learn. Like it's not like you're going to get to the bottom of what's going on in medicine. It's always going to be out there. It's always going to be there. And I found it really interesting. You said, "Don't let medicine become your identity." And it's interesting. I interviewed a medical school student recently, and she said similar things. Of when she reads. She forces herself to get away from the textbooks and she reads fiction. And she's like, even if I only have time to read one page of a book at the end of a day, I do it. And I think that's a really interesting advice. And then like, there's a lot of pressure, right, to make the CV look good. Like, oh, I've got to keep, I feel like, this is a long time ago, but I was pre-med for a while. And it was, I feel like a lot of the people I was hanging out with were doing a lot of things, like you said, over the summers. Like, I got to beef up that CV. And, at the time there was starting to, and this is in the States and it was a while ago. So there was a shift though from, it used to be, your undergrad had to be biology, chemistry, like something super sciencey, and that would look really good. And all your summers had to be doing like internships at hospitals, volunteers, whatever, and then just keep doing that to get into med school, because it was such a big deal, like getting in. And what I found was there was a shift at the time where I was towards people who had a little bit more of a variety of background, because they're like, what, as we keep bringing on people who have studied all the same stuff and all the same things, they're like, we're creating sort of like this very homogenous group of physicians. And so when I started, I met a guy who had been in the Air Force for a while, and then he became a doctor. I met someone who was like a history major, and I was starting to feel, even though I didn't end up pursuing medicine, I started feeling better about myself because I had an undergrad in a Bachelor of Liberal Arts, and I was squeezing in my pre-med requirements in the summers. And so I think it was a good shift to move more towards, there's a lot of really great non-super sciencey humans that want to become doctors.
Oh yeah.
And is that continued? Like, I haven't been in it for a long time. So
yeah, I was actually just going to say, so as I'm doing interviews of med students today trying to get into the Queen's Family Medicine residency here. And I think one of my kind of criteria in the back of my mind, it's like, are you someone that I'm interested in, that I would go and have a beer with, that I can sit down and have a conversation with? Like, I mean, if you get through med school, you're smart enough to be a resident, and there are so many people who are smart enough to get into medical school. And I remember so much of my undergrad was trying to convince everybody else that I'm smart enough. And I would, and so I forced myself to do the sciences, and I said, I need to do everything that I can to get that background. And I would so much rather, I mean, all things being equal, I would much rather talk to and kind of learn more about the person who's in, like you said, the liberal arts, and just kind of try to understand their perspective of the world and of medicine and that kind of thing, and someone who had a biochem background like I did. So I think it's definitely trending more and more that way, which I think is a really, really good thing for medicine.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's, at the end of the day, people are people and people want to connect with people. And, like a lot of the doctors I've talked to, they got into medicine because they wanted to help people. Like, yes, they have a bent toward science, and, there's maybe certain characteristics around, being quite driven usually, the average doctor, I mean, to be able to get through it all. But I loved what you said about spending so much time proving I'm smart, like, and that's what I felt like in undergrad, or when I was hanging out with a lot of pre-meds, I felt like there was this sense of like, I certainly felt super like hyper aware of, oh my gosh, this person was valedictorian or this person was this. And I'm like, I'm not any of those things. Like, these people look super smart compared to me, all that stuff. And, but at the end of the day, and I mean, I'm a big believer in, bedside manner of, and I mean, I think there's some studies out there showing it. Well, actually, no, I did hear a study recently. So I was in this big conference for certified financial planners a couple weeks ago, and they said, which profession do you think has the hardest time saying, I don't know? And I yelled out, doctors. and a lot of other people did too, actually. He said, oh, most people say lawyers. And I said, but doctors is it. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, like, because I think there's this idea of, you don't, like, if someone's kind of has their life in your hands, and you don't want to hear, like, the doctor thinks, well, I don't want this person to hear me say, I don't know. But they said that they did a study, and they said the people whose doctors did say, I don't know, but I'll figure it out, or I don't know, but it doesn't matter, sort of thing. They said that the trust factor went way up when the person said, I don't know. And, I have some friends, so my dad's a doctor. I have some friends whose parents are doctors, and, they said they felt like they were trained to find a way to get around the I don't knows of, like, well, let's figure, rather than saying like, I don't know, it's like, well, let's figure this out, or let's, oh, let me think, and when in fact just straight up saying like, I don't know, let's figure it out, to know that these are humans too.
For sure. And a lot of people find ways to BS their way around things. And no, I think that's the hard part, is that you work so hard, and then to have someone ask you a question and say, I have no idea, we'll find out, or that kind of thing is hard, and it's hard to have that level of security. But you're right, I think that's what makes it's hard for us to do, but I think you're right. That's one of the qualities that I think we all strive for, and especially for me, who's getting closer to the end than the beginning of my training, and getting closer and closer to being in the real world. It's a little bit hard for me to stomach. Like, the more I see, the more you see, the more you realize you don't know. And I think that's hard to come to grips with a little bit after you work so hard, but that's just the reality.
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen there's a curve. I can't remember. There's a name for it, but it's sort of this, like, you start off as an amateur and you think you know, and then you realize you don't know, and then you learn more and you're like, oh, I know a lot. And then you hit this point where it's like, oh my God, there's so much more to know. And like, can't remember, I don't know, you seem to, you're familiar with it. I can't remember what it's called, but it's and there's also this paradox of like, there's like this sweet spot of when people think they know way more than they really do, and they're like hyper confident. Then when people learn more, they actually lose confidence, because it's like, oh, now I know how much is out there.
Definitely. Oh yeah, it's huge.
No, and in my world, like you said, like, I really do. I keep aware of my, like, when someone asks me a question and I don't know the answer, and it's like, first I'm like, uh-oh, like my gut reaction is, oh no, this is bad. And I catch myself. I'm like, this is, like you said, you can BS your way through any, like, if someone doesn't know, like, I could pull out all sorts of fancy terms and like, boggle someone's mind if they're not a CFP. I could like make up all sorts of stuff, and I've seen it happen. And I'm like, no, I have to catch myself in that moment. And so, like, if someone's coming in about something I know I don't know a ton about, I'm like, computer's open, Google's open, like all my stuff's open. Let's figure this out. And I say, like, there's so much to know, and it changes so much that it would be a detriment to not, want to discover, if anything's changed or what's new. So that's really cool. So what's next for you, Jordan? Like, what's on the horizon? You got, what do you have? Like, how much time do you have left as a resident?
So I could in theory, assuming I pass my exams, start practicing as a family doc out anytime after July. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to do an extra year of sports medicine at McMaster next year, which I'm really excited about. So in the future, I hope to do some sports medicine and some family medicine, among some other things. I really like working with teams and athletes and that kind of thing. So I hope to do some of that. I really like working with university athletes and that kind of thing. I was really lucky. I got to work with Team Canada at the 2017 University Games, which is it's a huge competition. It's the second biggest international competition for sport next to the Olympics. And I got to meet lots of really amazing people there and kind of get involved with that. So I hope to do something like that in the future, and obviously the Olympics is obviously is a huge bar. It's a huge goal, but I would love to work the Olympics at some point in the future. But that's quite a number of years down the road, so we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's cool. You got a lot of Olympics in the future to pick from, so
Yeah.
that's really cool. Yeah, to support athletes like that. And what about like last thing I'll ask before we finish is like what do you think it is about athletes that's drawn you? I mean, I know you're an athlete, but like what is it that's sort of drawn you to that?
It's a good question. I think there's a lot of things. I think you were talking about how physicians are often very driven, and athletes are very very driven population. Um, I found that over time, the patient population that I struggle the most with is the people who are apathetic or
Mm,
don't really care about their diabetes, and they understand the complications, and there's nothing that I can say or do to get them right on track. And I mean, fortunately, athletes are the total opposite end of the spectrum. I thought about going into pediatrics for a long time. I think athletes and pediatrics share a lot of similarities in the sense that they both really just want to get back to normal and get back to, if you're a kid, you just want to run around and play around, where if you're an athlete, you just want to get back to your sport. And like I said, very motivated, very driven. And just like I said, when you have similar interests and you can be very much on the same wavelength with the person that's in front of you, it's easy to do your job.
yeah, and I think I forgot to ask you about mindset, so I'm going to ask you one more question on mindset. And definitely, I think that's very cool. Like to work with people who or not who are like actively seeking health again, and much more in tune with what it's going to take, and not so apathetic. When I did my internship at Bellevue, there was the doctor running the program, very interesting guy, Dr. Goldfarb. He just retired, and he said that he very much felt like it was almost like a revolving door in the hospital where people would come in and he'd patch them up and send them out knowing that
Yeah.
they'd be back, knowing that, and that was the nature of the time and the place and the nature of that hospital in the area. People tended to end up there if they were people who had chronic issues that they weren't taking care of. And yeah, he said this is a Sisyphean task. He's like, have any of you ever heard of Sisyphus? And being a Bachelor of Liberal Arts student, I was the only one who raised my hand. And then it's like, yeah, the guy who pushed the boulder up the hill and to have it roll down every day. And I was very impressed by his dedication to stay at this hospital for I think like 40 something years, and just acknowledge that their role for a lot of people was, we're going to patch you up long enough to get back out into the world before you have to come back again. And knowing that your general health trajectory is not going to be upwards, it's going to be very much rocky. And so, I was like, wow, good for you, man, to be able to
Mhm.
keep that going. So mindset, I heard you on another podcast a little bit ago. And I mean, when it comes to athletes, like I have learned, I'll say very quickly, like when I'm doing a triathlon and I'm like 2 hours and change in, and I've still got like the run ahead of me, and I start saying to I have to be very careful about what I say to myself, because I start saying to myself, it's hot, I'm tired, I can't do this. What if this happens? What if that happens? And I know that I have to get back onto like, I can do this. I've trained for this. I'm ready for this. I've done it before. And so I'd be curious to see like, what about the mindset of sport and medicine, and like and you climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, like, is there anything around mindset habits that you've acquired over time?
Um, it's it's a good question. I think you're exactly right in terms of the right, like in terms of self-talk and that kind of thing. I think about at the gym a lot when you're in the middle of a tough workout, or like you said, in the middle of a race in a triathlon. It's a lot about what you're saying to yourself. And I find that when my mental health struggles, it's a lot of the self-talk issues that I really struggle with. And fortunately, I've got
Mm,
a lot of really good people in my life to help me out with that. I can identify it, fortunately, fairly well, but it's something that I have to be very conscious of. And I'm working on, developing a list of things that I can do when I know I'm in that mindset about how to kind of straighten myself back out. So I know that when I'm struggling, I have a little bit of a trajectory, and I kind of know what I need to do to get back on track. And I mean, sometimes it takes days or weeks or whatever. But when I'm doing well, like it's a matter of, like I was kind of saying before, like finding out what you're passionate about,
mm,
and doing those things. And again, seeing lots of friends and kind of continuing to kind of do those things. And I find that naturally when you're following your passions, like the goals that you set for yourself kind of set themselves. And that, like I said, we all have good days and bad days, and if you can get something out of each and every day, then you will have succeeded. And that looks different whether you have a long day of clinic or if you climb Mount Kilimanjaro. But if you get a little bit better every day, and by the end of a whole bunch of days, you'll be a lot better.
Very cool. So like that incremental progress and knowing yourself well enough to know what's going to keep you in sync and surrounding yourself with people that can help in times. And I mean, a big part of that is being like you're willing to open up about, the fact that your self-talk is rocky and you do need help getting through things, which I think is hard for a lot of people to do, especially professionals to say like, hey, I don't have it all figured out all the time. I need some help.
Yeah, no chance.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Jordan. This has been very fascinating.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, sure thing. And good luck with everything. I look forward to seeing you, like helping out all those Olympic athletes and seeing you out there with them.
For sure.
Cool. Take care.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye. This is your host, Galen Nuttall. Thank you for joining me at A Clean Bill of Wealth, the podcast for Canadian doctors. I hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to check out my free video series at galenhelpsdocs.com, where I debunk some of the myths around wealth generation for Canadian doctors. Take care and talk to you soon.